There was a man who treated speed like religion. He built the most dominant team in basketball history on one idea: don't walk the ball up the floor, run it, grab the rebound and beat the other team before they even realize the play is over. To Red Auerbach, slow was the enemy. Slow meant lazy. If a player couldn't run, he couldn't help him win. 9 championships as a coach, 16 rings in total, the greatest winner basketball had ever seen. And then, in the summer of 1978, this apostle of speed bet his entire franchise on a kid everyone said was too slow. A kid who couldn't outrun elite athletes, couldn't jump over anyone. A kid one rival later dismissed as a slow white boy who couldn't get off the ground. His name was Larry Bird, and the story of how Red Auerbach, the man who hated slow players, fell in love with the slowest superstar in basketball is one of the greatest gambles in American sports. But to understand just how insane this gamble was, you first have to understand the man making it. Because nobody in the history of the game was more obsessed with speed than Red Auerbach. And that obsession started long before he ever set foot in Boston. Arnold Auerbach grew up in Brooklyn, the son of a Russian immigrant who ran a dry cleaning shop. He was a decent player, nothing special, a scrappy guard with more brains than talent. But when he got a scholarship to George Washington University, he ended up playing for a coach named Bill Reinhart. And Reinhart believed in something that, at the time, almost nobody else did. He believed in running. In an era when basketball was a slow, plodding, half-court grind, where teams would walk the ball up and pass it around for a minute at a time, Reinhart preached the opposite. Push the pace, attack before the defense can set, turn every missed shot, every rebound, every steal into a sprint toward the other basket. Young Red Auerbach soaked it up like a sponge. That running game would become the foundation of everything he ever did. When he got his first professional coaching jobs with Washington and then a stop in Iowa, he brought that philosophy with him. And when he finally landed in Boston in 1950, taking over a Celtics team that was broke, losing, and an afterthought in its own city, he didn't change a thing. He doubled down. He found a flashy young guard named Bob Cousy. Now, plenty of coaches at the time thought Cousy was reckless, too fancy, too risky with the ball. Auerbach didn't see recklessness. He saw a weapon. He told Cousy in so many words that if he was going to make a mistake out there, he should make it at full speed. Don't slow down to be safe. Push it, attack, let the genius fly. And it worked. The Celtics started winning, but they were missing one piece. That piece arrived in 1956 in the form of a long-armed defensive genius from the University of San Francisco named Bill Russell. And Russell didn't just change the Celtics' defense, he changed their offense too. Because Russell would block a shot or grab a rebound and instantly fire a perfect outlet pass up the floor, and suddenly the whole Boston team was off to the races, 3-on-2, 4-on-3, scoring before the other team could even turn around. That was the engine. Rebound, outlet, sprint, score. Over and over and over until the other team's legs gave out and their will collapsed. One of Auerbach's own players, Tom Heinsohn, described it in chilling terms. He said Red's whole strategy was to destroy the will of the other team to beat you, to put them through a physical and mental ordeal, running hard, pressing full court, attacking on every possession, until the opponent was forced to play at twice their normal pace and think twice as fast as they ever had. Heinsohn called it guerrilla warfare. You were always under attack, you could never catch your breath, and it produced something the sport had never seen and may never see again. 8 championships in a row, 9 titles in 10 years. A dynasty so complete it broke the league. So sit with that for a second. This is the man we're talking about, a coach whose entire identity, whose entire genius, whose entire legend was built on speed, on conditioning, on running teams into the ground. In Red Auerbach's basketball, the slow player was useless, worse than useless. He was a liability who would get left behind, a weak link in the chain. The guy who couldn't keep up while everyone else flew down the court. He spent 30 years proving that the fastest team wins. So why on earth would a man like that fall in love with the one kind of player his whole system was supposed to reject? To answer that, we have to leave Boston for a minute. We have to drive deep into rural Indiana to a tiny town called French Lick and meet the most unlikely superstar in basketball history. Larry Bird was not built like an athlete. Not the kind of athlete the NBA was producing in the late 70s anyway. This was an era when the league was getting faster, higher, more explosive by the year. The game was tilting toward the kind of jaw-dropping athletes who could leap out of the gym and run like deer. Players who could fly. Larry Bird could not fly. He couldn't run particularly fast. He couldn't jump particularly high. He wasn't quick in the way scouts loved to measure quickness. He was a big, pale, slow-looking kid from the sticks who, on first glance, looked more like he belonged on a softball diamond than an NBA court. For years, all the way through his career, opponents and critics would size him up and come to the same lazy conclusion. They saw a slow, white guy who couldn't get off the floor. Years later, the greatest players of the next generation would say it out loud. Michael Jordan would flatly state that Bird couldn't really jump and wasn't quick. Kobe Bryant, studying old film, would look at Bird and admit that to him, the guy just looked slow. That was the book on Larry Bird, unathletic, earthbound, plodding. And here's the wild part. Bird agreed with them. He never pretended to be a leaping, sprinting freak of nature. He admitted openly that he couldn't run fast and he couldn't jump high. So he said he had to come up with another gimmick to survive. He had to find a different way to win. That gimmick was the most ruthless work ethic the sport had ever seen. If he couldn't beat you with his legs, he would beat you with his mind. He would learn the fundamentals deeper than anyone else. He would master the footwork, the angles, the timing, the geometry of the game. He would study where every shot was going to come off the rim before it even left a shooter's hand. He would practice until his hands bled and then practice some more. While the gifted athletes coasted on their talent, Bird outthought them, outworked them, and outprepared them. He was always one step ahead, not because his feet were faster, but because his brain was. Down at Indiana State University, a small school that nobody in the basketball world paid any attention to, that approach turned into something staggering. Bird put up numbers that didn't look real. Over his 3 years with the Sycamores, he averaged better than 30 points, more than 13 rebounds, and nearly 5 assists a game. He could score from anywhere. He could pass like a point guard trapped in a forward's body. He could rebound in traffic and find a teammate across the court without even looking at him. But here's the thing. In 1978, almost nobody had seen it. There was no national television package showing a small school like Indiana State. There was no internet, no highlight reels flying around the world overnight. The Sycamores weren't on anyone's radar. Bird was a legend in Terre Haute and a rumor everywhere else. Most NBA executives knew the name and not much more. They had heard he was good. They had also heard he was slow, that he couldn't defend the elite athletes, that he might not translate to the pro game at all. So when the 1978 draft rolled around, Larry Bird was a question mark. A talented question mark, but a question mark all the same. And there was one more complication, a big one. Bird wasn't even supposed to be in that draft yet. This is where the story gets strange and where Red Auerbach's genius starts to show. Larry Bird was technically still a junior. He had 1 more year of college eligibility left, and he had made it crystal clear that he intended to use it. He wanted to go back to Indiana State for his senior season. He wanted to finish what he started, but there was a quirk in the rules. A loophole. Because of the winding path Bird had taken to get to Indiana State, his original college class, the group he first enrolled with back in 1974, was set to graduate in 1978. And under the rules of that era, that made him eligible to be drafted that year, whether he wanted to come out or not. He didn't have to declare. He didn't have to apply for anything. The calendar made him available, which created a bizarre situation. Any team could draft Larry Bird in 1978, but if they did, they would have to wait. He was going back to school no matter what. Whoever picked him would own his rights for exactly 1 year and not a day longer. If they couldn't sign him before the next draft in 1979, he would simply re-enter the pool, and they would lose him for nothing. For almost every team in the league, that was a deal-breaker. Why on earth would you spend a valuable draft pick on a player who couldn't suit up for you for an entire season and who might walk away from you at the end of it anyway? You'd be punting a year of an asset on a slow forward from a school no one had heard of. So they passed. One after another, they passed. Bird's own home state team, the Indiana Pacers, held the very first pick. They wanted the local hero badly. But when they couldn't convince him to leave school early, they got cold feet and traded that first pick away to Portland. Portland couldn't get him to sign either. The pick rolled on. Kansas City took a point guard. Indiana, picking again at number 3, grabbed a center named Rick Roby, a kid who, in a twist nobody could have predicted, would later end up as Bird's teammate and one of his closest friends in Boston. The Knicks took a guard. Golden State took a shooter. 5 teams, 5 chances, 5 passes on Larry Bird. And then it was Boston's turn. Now Auerbach was sitting on a gift. The Celtics actually held 2 picks in the top 8 that year, the 6th and the 8th, the second one coming over from the Lakers in a trade. So Red had insurance. No matter what happened with the Bird gamble, he had another selection coming to bring in a player who could help right away. He had nothing to lose by swinging for the fences, so he swung. The Boston Celtics selected Larry Bird from Indiana State with the 6th pick in the 1978 NBA draft. And the reaction around the league ranged from confusion to outright mockery. Because remember, this wasn't the Larry Bird the world would come to know. This was an unproven kid from a tiny school who couldn't even play for a year. The great Philadelphia coach Billy Cunningham reportedly walked up to Auerbach and asked him point blank why he would waste a pick on this Bird kid, knowing the guy couldn't take the floor until the following season. And Auerbach, in classic Red fashion, didn't even blink. He simply asked Cunningham if he had any idea how short a year really was. That was it. That was the whole answer. A year was nothing. A year was a blink. To everyone else, waiting a full season for an unproven, slow-footed forward looked like madness. To Auerbach, it was the most obvious bargain in the world. He had decided this kid was special, and he was perfectly willing to be patient. Patience, after all, costs nothing when you know you're right. But here's what makes the gamble even bigger than it looks. Auerbach wasn't betting from a position of strength. He was betting from the bottom. Because by 1978, the mighty Boston Celtics were a mess. The dynasty was long gone. The team that had ruled the 60s was a distant memory. The franchise had collapsed into chaos, tangled up in ownership disputes and bad trades and aging legends. They were losing. The pride of the league had become an embarrassment, and the NBA itself was in trouble in those years, struggling with image problems, sagging interest, and a fan base that was drifting away. Auerbach was so fed up with the dysfunction around him that he very nearly quit. In the summer of 1978, the owner of the New York Knicks came calling with a big money offer to come run their operation, and Red was tempted. He got in a cab, headed for the airport, ready to fly to New York and walk away from Boston for good. And then, as the story goes, the cab driver started talking. He told Auerbach how much the city loved him, how much Boston needed him, how he was family to them. By the time that cab ride was over, Red had changed his mind. He wasn't going anywhere. Soon after, he stood in front of the press, lit up one of his famous victory cigars, and made a declaration with all the swagger in the world. He told them he was staying put. He told them the Celtics were going to sign Larry Bird, and they were going to climb right back to the top of the league. He said it like it was already done, like it was a fact and not a hope, like he could already see the banners going up. But there was a problem with that confident promise, a huge one, because between Auerbach saying those words and Bird actually wearing a Celtics uniform stood an entire college season, and after that, a contract negotiation that would push Red right to the edge. And first, Larry Bird had a date with destiny that would change basketball forever. While the Celtics waited, Bird went back to Indiana State for his senior year. And he didn't just play well, he turned the entire college basketball world upside down. The Sycamores, the little school nobody cared about, started winning, and winning, and winning. Game after game, Bird carved up every defense thrown at him, and Indiana State kept climbing the rankings until the unthinkable happened. This tiny program rose all the way to #1 in the country. They ran the table. An undefeated regular season, an undefeated march through the tournament, 33 wins and 0 losses all the way to the national championship game. Suddenly, the whole nation knew the name they'd been ignoring. Larry Bird won every individual award there was to win. Player of the Year, the biggest honors in the college game. He went from a rumor to the most famous amateur in America in the span of a single season. And waiting for him at the end of that perfect run in the national title game was a wide-smiling, fast-breaking marvel from Michigan State named Magic Johnson. It was the most watched college basketball game in history to that point. The slow-looking grinder from the small school against the dazzling showman from the big program. Bird against Magic. And though Indiana State's perfect season finally ended that night, with Michigan State taking the crown, the rivalry that was born on that court would go on to save the entire NBA. The two of them, linked forever from that very first collision, would drag professional basketball out of the gutter and into a golden age. But all of that was still to come. Back in Boston, Auerbach watched Bird's magical senior year with a mixture of joy and dread. Joy, because the kid he'd gambled on had just proven, in front of the entire country, that he was the real thing. And dread, because every single highlight, every award, every magazine cover made Larry Bird more expensive and more desirable. The whole world could see now what Red had seen early. And that meant the price was about to skyrocket, and the clock was ticking down toward the deadline where Bird could slip away and re-enter the draft. Auerbach had won the gamble on talent. Now he had to win the war over money, and that turned out to be the hardest fight of all. Here's where Red's legendary stubbornness almost cost him everything. Auerbach was famous, or infamous, for how he handled contracts. He negotiated hard. He negotiated cheap, and he had a rule he lived by, a rule about team harmony. He did not believe in paying a rookie, a player who had never taken a single shot in the NBA, more than the veterans who had already bled for the team. It was a matter of principle to him. You earn your money on the floor, not on potential. At the time, the highest paid player on the Celtics was the tough, fiery center Dave Cowens, who was making around $400,000 a year. And Auerbach drew a line in the sand. He was not going to pay some unproven rookie more than his battle-tested star. That was the offer. Take it or leave it. But Bird had a representative, an agent named Bob Wolf, and Wolf was not impressed by Red's tough guy routine. He flatly rejected the lowball offers, and he delivered a message that cut right through all of Auerbach's leverage. He made it absolutely clear that if Boston wouldn't pay what Bird was worth, Larry would have zero regrets about letting his rights expire, walking back into the 1979 draft and signing with somebody who would. And everyone knew what that meant. If Bird re-entered the draft, he would be the #1 pick in a landslide. The Celtics would have waited a full year, watched him become a national sensation, and gotten absolutely nothing for it. Red's grand gamble would go down as the biggest blunder of his career. So Auerbach faced a choice that went against everything he believed in. Hold the line on principle and risk losing the best young player he'd ever scouted, or break his own sacred rule and pay up. He paid up. In the spring of 1979, the Celtics signed Larry Bird to a 5-year contract worth $3.25 million. That worked out to around $650,000 a year, which not only blew past Dave Cowens, it made Bird the highest-paid rookie in the history of team sports up to that point. A college kid who had never played a professional minute was suddenly the best-paid player on a franchise full of veterans. Auerbach had bent. The man who never overpaid, who built his entire reputation on tough, cheap, hard-nosed deals, opened the checkbook for a slow forward from Indiana State. That alone should tell you how sure he was. And the rest of the league took notice in a different way, too. The whole maneuver, drafting a player a full year before he could sign and stashing him in college, was so clever and so disruptive that the NBA eventually changed the rules to stop anyone from ever doing it again. They closed the loophole. The fix even became informally known around the league by Bird's name. Red had found a crack in the system and squeezed a Hall of Famer through it, and they had to rewrite the book to make sure no one repeated the trick. So now Auerbach had his man. The gamble was complete. The contract was signed. The slow kid was finally a Celtic. And that's when the real magic happened. Because everyone, including, by his own admission, Red Auerbach himself, was about to find out that they had badly underestimated exactly what kind of player Larry Bird was. Remember the whole premise here. Red Auerbach hated slow players. His entire system was built on speed. So how does that square with him handing the keys to a guy the whole world called slow? Here's the secret. Here's what Auerbach saw that the scouts and the critics missed. Larry Bird wasn't actually slow where it counted. Yes, he couldn't run a blazing sprint. Yes, he couldn't sky for a dunk. But the people who played with him, the people who actually had to deal with him every day, told a very different story. Dave Cowens, his own teammate, said you could tell from the very first day that the book on Bird was wrong. People always said he wasn't fast, Cowens said, but Bird was quick where it mattered. He had a great first step. He could blow right past a defender. He could handle the ball. And most importantly, he had a quick mind and a lightning-fast release. A quick mind. That's the whole thing right there. See, Auerbach's obsession with speed was never really just about legs. It was about pace. It was about playing faster than the other team could think. It was about that fast break, that instant outlet pass, that decision made a half second before everyone else. Red wanted players who could process the game at warp speed, who could see the play developing before it happened, who could move the ball and make the right read faster than the defense could react. And in that sense, in the only sense that truly mattered to him, Larry Bird might have been the fastest player Auerbach ever had. Bird's mind was the quickest thing on the court. He saw passing lanes that didn't exist yet. He grabbed a defensive rebound and had already mapped out the fast break in his head before his feet hit the floor, firing outlet passes the length of the court right into a teammate's hands. He anticipated where everyone on both teams was going to be 3 seconds in the future. He played the game at a speed nobody else could match, just not with his legs, with his brain. It turned out that the man who worshipped speed had found a brand new kind of fast. The fastest thing on a basketball court isn't a sprint. It's a great decision made instantly. And nobody in the history of the game made great decisions faster than Larry Bird. Auerbach hadn't betrayed his philosophy at all. He had just found the purest expression of it in the most unexpected package imaginable. And the results came immediately, explosively. The season before Bird arrived, the Celtics had been a disaster, winning just 29 games. A laughingstock. In Bird's very first year, with that same broken roster suddenly orbiting around his genius, Boston won 61 games. 61. It was the single greatest one-season turnaround the league had ever seen. The slow kid from Indiana State walked in the door and instantly transformed the worst kind of team into a powerhouse. He was named Rookie of the Year in a runaway. He made the All-Star team. He was named to the All-NBA team as a first-year player. In one season, Larry Bird took the proudest franchise in basketball from the bottom of the standings and put it right back on the map. Exactly like Auerbach had promised, with that cigar in his hand. And Red, free now to operate from a position of strength, started building the empire around his new cornerstone. The most famous move came in 1980, in a draft day heist so brazen it became known forever as the steal of the century. Auerbach worked the phones and convinced the Golden State Warriors to send him the number 3 pick, along with a young, unproven center named Robert Parrish, in exchange for a couple of Boston's draft picks. With that number 3 selection, Red grabbed a lanky, brilliant big man named Kevin McHale. Just like that, in a single afternoon of dealing, Auerbach had assembled the greatest front court in the history of the sport. Bird, McHale, and Parrish. 3 future Hall of Famers playing together, anchored by the slow kid nobody wanted. He kept tinkering, kept improving. At one point, he even consulted Bird himself about a trade, asking the young star how he felt about dealing away his good friend Rick Robey. Bird was reluctant until he heard who was coming back in the deal. A tough, brilliant guard named Dennis Johnson. When Bird heard that name, his hesitation vanished. He told Auerbach to make the deal, no question about it. That kind of selflessness, that willingness to give up a friend to make the team better, was exactly the championship mindset Red had spent his whole life chasing. The pieces clicked into place, and the slow forward from French Lick led them to the top of the mountain again, and again and again. 3 NBA championships, 3 of them with banners raised in Boston in 1981, 1984, and 1986. 3 consecutive Most Valuable Player awards. A feat almost nobody in the history of the sport has matched. 2 finals MVPs. He was an all-star year after year, 12 times over. He was named to the All-NBA team 10 times. He would be enshrined in the Hall of Fame and named to the list of the greatest players ever to lace them up. And the rivalry that started in that college title game, Bird against Magic, Celtics against Lakers, became the engine that powered the NBA's entire rebirth. The 2 of them, the grinder and the showman, turned the league from a struggling afterthought into a global phenomenon. Every kid in America picked a side. The whole sport came roaring back to life on the backs of those 2, and one of them was the slow guy that 5 teams passed on. Auerbach watched it all unfold, and he never stopped marveling at what he had found. Years later, he was asked who he would pick if he had to start a franchise from scratch, if he could choose any single player in the history of the game to build around. This was a man who had coached Bill Russell, the ultimate winner, who had coached Bob Cousy and Sam Jones and a roster full of legends, who had 16 championships to look back on, and his answer was Larry Bird. He said that if he had to start a team today, the one player he would take above all others was Bird. He admitted, with real humility, that even he had underestimated the kid. He knew Bird was a good shooter, Auerbach said, but he had no idea just how great. He knew he was a fine rebounder and passer, but not how great. And he had no idea, until he saw it with his own eyes, how willing Bird was to play through brutal injuries, to drag a broken body up and down the floor on pure will. Larry, he said, was the most self-motivated player he had ever seen in his life. The most self-motivated player he had ever seen. From the man who coached the greatest dynasty in sports history. That was the final verdict on the slow kid from Indiana. So here's where we land, after all of it. Red Auerbach spent 30 years building a religion out of speed. He believed, down to his bones, that the fastest team wins, that slow is the enemy, that a player who cannot run cannot help you. He proved it over and over, dynasty after dynasty, banner after banner, and then he met a forward who could not run and could not jump, a guy the whole world wrote off as too slow for the modern game. A player who looked, on the surface, like everything Red Auerbach was supposed to reject. But instead of turning away, Red saw something nobody else did. He saw that the fastest thing on a basketball court was never really the legs. It was the mind. It was recognition. Anticipation. The ability to see the play before it happened. To make the pass before the defense even knew it was open. To turn thought into action faster than anyone else on the floor. And Larry Bird had the quickest mind the game had ever produced. That is the beautiful contradiction at the heart of this whole story. Auerbach did not abandon his love of speed when he fell for Larry Bird. He fulfilled it. He found the truest, purest, most devastating version of the thing he had been chasing his entire career, hidden inside the body of the one kind of player his system was supposed to reject. The man who hated slow players found his greatest gamble, his greatest triumph, and arguably his greatest player in the slowest-looking superstar who ever lived. It just goes to show that the real legends, the Auerbachs of the world, do not see what everyone else sees. They look past the obvious, past the stereotypes, past the things you can measure with a stopwatch or a vertical leap test. They see the thing that actually wins. Red saw past Larry Bird's body and into his basketball soul. He saw a player who could control the pace of a game without ever needing to outrun it. He saw a player who could make everyone around him faster, sharper, and more dangerous. And every so often, that kind of vision is so far ahead of its time that the rest of the world has to rewrite the rulebook just to catch up. Red waited a year for Larry Bird. He overpaid for Larry Bird. He broke his own rules for Larry Bird. And he would tell you, until the day he died, that it was the smartest thing he ever did. Like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the legends and the unforgettable moments that shaped the history of basketball. Until next time.